Hello, everyone. My name is Sabrina Fu, and I have been a steadfast Citizens Climate Lobby volunteer for 9 years now.
Yeah.
The road to effective climate legislation has been much longer than any of us had hoped. What has helped me along this long journey is getting to meet and work with people like you, and getting to meet incredible people like our panelists here. And I'm going to give a quick introduction of each of them. We have Wandra Ashley-Williams, Clarence Edwards, and Alex Bozmoski. Wandra Ashley-Williams is an accomplished senior management executive, community activist, and elected official with notable experience in diversified industries, as well as public service. She holds key leadership positions at several organizations, including Board of Directors for NAACP National and Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women. In addition, Wandra is very involved with Maryland State Conference of NAACP and serves on the NAACP Board of Environmental and Climate Justice Program Committee. Wandra advocated for the passage of the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act, which increases the renewable electricity standard to 50% by 2030. Maryland CCL volunteers should recognize Wandra as the head of the Maryland Climate Crisis and Environmental Justice Act in her work as Maryland Regional Director of Climate Xchange. I just want to quickly add that Wandra thinks highly enough of CCL to spend some time by the pool with us last night. Thanks so much for that, Wandra. So the most right here, we have Alex Bozmoski, who is Vice President of Programs at Deploy Us, an organization whose mission is to accelerate bipartisan climate leadership. Alex focuses on supporting the growth and effectiveness of eco-right organizations and their allies in business, faith, military, and conservation civic enterprises. Previously, Alex was managing director of our other friend, Republican.org. Part of his 15 years of grassroots education, business, technical assistance, and academic research. Alex also developed clean energy projects in East Africa, consulted for think tanks, authored peer-reviewed articles, worked on several GOP campaigns, and designed and facilitated e-learning courses on environmental economics for World Bank technical assistance programs. Alex thinks highly enough of CCL to leave his 2 young kids in Milwaukee for a few days to spend with us. And in the middle here, we have wonderful Clarence Edwards, who has advised US and foreign governments, international non-governmental organizations, and foundations on navigating US policy and political dynamics. His experience includes advising the Australian aid program, serving as congressional appropriation liaison for US Department of Energy, lobbying for Bono and his organization, the One Campaign, and managing the congressional program for the Council on Foreign Affairs. While attending the World Bank annual meeting as part of the Australian delegation, he was struck by the challenges facing Pacific Island nations threatened by rising sea level. And this propels his desire to delve into climate policy. Clarence is presently the Legislative Director, Sustainable Energy and Environment for Friends Committee on National Legislation. Please welcome our keynote panel. Okay, so to start us off on this discussion, I really do want it to be a discussion between all four of us, but mainly three of them hopefully, is to first acknowledge that we do live in difficult times where we're trying to get climate legislation, in the midst of surface racial discord and injustices, war in Ukraine, inflation, right, school shootings. And so these are really difficult times, and what I wanted to start off with is to ask them is that what is one central value of thought that keeps you centered during these difficult times? Clarence, would you begin?
Sure, thank you, Sabrina, and thank you everyone for having me participate in your annual conference. It's nice to see people in person after 2 years of Zoom. I'm still doing Zoom, but what keeps me, Joanna Macy talks about something called active hope, and that's a great book, and it really has inspired me. And it's about having hope, but really, you have to lean into it. You have to work to make hope a reality, your hopes and dreams a reality. That's what keeps me fueled. It's getting up every day, looking at the challenges, remembering that throughout our history in the US and throughout world history, people have had to struggle for change. Think about the suffragettes, think about the civil rights movement, think about Stonewall and the LGBT community. So it's always a struggle, it's always a challenge, and as a nation we've always gone through difficult times, but we've come out the other side. So that's what keeps me motivated. This is just our moment in history while we're here on this planet to struggle and to bring change. So I stay hopeful.
Thanks. Alex, do you want to add to that?
Sure, so thanks, Sabrina. I think was your question, like, what helps you keep you centered?
Yeah, thoughts or values.
Right. I was thinking, pretty much every day I come untethered from being centered. So what might help bring me back, not always successfully, but you try. I think gratitude is the word that I'd be looking for. It's pretty incredible that we get to spend our days doing doing work that we think is going to make the world a better place. It's like an infinitesimally small percentage of human history that's gotten to do that, which is really incredible. And I'm, I guess, also grateful that we live in a republic, which means that the fruits of our labor may actually change things. Like, we have the tools, we have the franchise and the tools to move our country and society in the direction that we think is best for the common weal. And then also, but of course that doesn't happen alone. So I'm also just very grateful for all of you and all the people. Like, every incremental step of progress that we make, we're making together, and there are so many people that deserve credit for it. None of our work would be possible without a lot of folks that we don't know that are also dedicating their careers to hopefully never being remembered. I mean, they're going to remember us if we fail, but if we succeed, probably less so. Anyways, thank you, and I'm grateful for our panelists too, and CCL for having us. It's for all my friends that I've known, Matt, over the years, that I'm well, I can't really see you now because these are blinding me, but that I've seen in the hallways. Thanks for having us.
Alice is correct. We are kind of blinded up here, but I can certainly see all of you. And I just want to start by saying that this is beautiful, a beautiful way to start a week. And to thank all of you, because you care about this planet. And this is not easy work to do. And so as the regional director for Climate Xchange, I advocate for carbon reduction, carbon pricing in Maryland. And I bring to this position my values, my priorities, which are very simple: diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. That is who I am. That is me to my core. As Sabrina mentioned, I'm on the National Board of Directors for the NAACP. I work for the state, well, volunteer for the state NAACP in leadership. And when I took this position, I had to make a really difficult decision, and that was to move up as president of the state NAACP to address issues around justice, or take this position. And one of the positions one of the organizations or committees that, as a board member, I oversee is the Environmental Justice Committee. And I understand the importance of justice when we do this work. And therefore, I want to say a voice for the voiceless, because all of us have a voice. But the problem is we're not always heard. And so if I can bring the attention to issues of concern, that is what I do. And so the one thing that I discovered the minute I took this position was that we need a coalition to advance legislation in Maryland or anywhere. You have to work in a coalition. We all have to breathe clean air. And therefore, not just our environmental climate organizations, and we certainly need them at the table, definitely need them at the table, but we have to bring in the frontline communities that are affected the most. They need to come to the table with a voice. We need to bring in our justice communities. We need to bring in labor unions. Definitely have to bring them into the table when we're having a discussion about the type of legislation that is going to help us move into this green environment. We need to bring in the medical field. I mean, our health is definitely at stake. It's definitely harmed. And so we need to bring in the medical community. We need students. We need students and youth involved. We've created a mess for them to clean up. And so therefore, we need to bring them in now. We need to listen to them, and we need to train them. We need to mentor them so they can take over when we're no longer here to protect our earth. Okay? Faith-based organizations. That's the core of most communities. So we need to bring in the faith-based businesses. We need the businesses. We need to hear from them. We need to know how this crisis is affecting them and their bottom line. And I can go on and on and on. But the bottom line is that we need a strong coalition. All of us need to come together to make this work. And at the end of the day, this is not easy work. It takes, as we were saying earlier, it takes a while to get policy, no matter what the policy is, it takes a while to get it passed. But this is not easy. So at the end of the day, I usually say to myself, there's a Serenity Prayer, and I'm sure most of you have heard it, and hopefully I'll get it right. It is, I pray that God gives me serenity to know what I can change, what I cannot change, but more important, to know the difference. And I'll end there.
So I'd love to hear more about that coalition building from all three of you, especially, because you are building coalitions with the Eco Right, and you are building coalitions with many other groups that want national climate legislation.
I'll start. We work with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which has great overlap with CCL. I was saying to someone earlier that when I started this job, I would talk to FCNL constituents, and they say, have you talked to Citizens Climate Lobby? Have you talked to Citizens Climate Lobby? And finally I was like, yes, I've talked to Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm like, who are these people? And it's just, and it's I love that overlap. And you know, I was amazed about this coalition of people in the grassroots who were concerned with carbon pricing. You know, after years of working on international relations, I got more into, decided to take a deep dive into climate, energy, and environmental issues. And I was like, carbon pricing, that sounds cool. That sounds pretty straightforward and smart. Everyone should support that. And I just, yeah, and it does. And I've since learned that it's you know, it's a push, it's a struggle, but this coalition that you talk about. So from the faith community out is how I like to work. And so we reach out to CCL. We reach across the aisles because it's vitally important to get across the point. I say to my colleagues that, you know, Mother Nature doesn't really care about your political affiliation. So we need coalitions across the board, conservatives, liberals, whatever label, political label you want. So one of the things that we do is we work across the aisles. We work with private sector. I'm part of something called the Clean Incentives Coalition, and we're pushing for clean energy and transportation tax incentives for battery storage and advanced manufacturing. So it has to be public sector, private sector, volunteer groups. So I think it's vitally important because this is not just a political issue that needs to be dealt with on Capitol Hill, as you all know. This is a broad-based societal change that we need to have everybody or as many people on board with as we possibly can. So you can't overstate how important it is to work with broad-based groups.
Alex, do you want to?
Okay, so the bullseye of what I want to say is going to be about polarization. I think polarization is a little bit like climate change in that even if, you know, if we were to decarbonize tomorrow, there would be climate change for a period of time because of what's baked into the system. If we were to, let's decarbonize for like outrage, like de-Bolognize the, you know, the
de-Bolognification.
There you go. Right. There would be inertia in the system that would continue to spin us in this vortex of polarization because of something that's been called the law of group polarization. Like as we sort ourselves into groups of people that think very much alike, we tend to move towards the more extreme positions in the group. And so this is happening in America through like the big sort as people are kind of sorting themselves geographically. But it's also happening in, I mean, it has happened in our social movements and our environmental movement. And I think we have the agency and the tools to overcome the vortex of polarization. Okay, relationships win over addiction to outrage, but you have to really work those relationships. Civil society wins. It's sad that it's eroding in parts of the country, but not here. And I mean, this is one of the most amazing things, sidebar, about CCL, is that it's not, you're a civic enterprise and also a, you know, civil society. I've seen so many real friends just walking through here, and my exposure to this community is much less than all of yours. So I mean, there's just so much genuine relationship here. I think that overcomes polarization. But there are whole industries that are that profit by addicting us to outrage and to fearing each other, and that is like the primary obstacle to getting things done. That in a country that requires us to work together to get things done. So, whereas I think that relationships in civil society, that's where the real, that's where the solution set lies, and that's why CCL is so powerful. We also may have agency to affect some of the drivers of this vortex, and some of that is the things that contribute to to like the sorting of the environmental movement into more like tribal camps. And when the panelists were getting to know each other a little bit, we talked a little bit about, and I don't want to, if we're going to talk about this a little later, I don't want to like steal your thunder. But there's obviously money at play, right? We might talk about that. But of the $8 billion of environmental philanthropy, okay, like 99% of that goes to pretty progressive organizations working with pretty progressive constituencies. That pulls people together that think kind of alike, and it makes it harder to work together on issues. So I think just diversifying how we can, the spectrum of Americans that we work with on climate is important, and I know a deep value of CCL. I love that CCL is a values-based organization. I think that a lot of your values are written down and they're wonderful. And then I also love some of the values that you don't write down, like how you clap after everyone talks up on stage.
Like that. I just want to do an intervention and say I totally agree with Alex on the point that we have to avoid what's happening in terms of people get siloed into their climate approaches and their particular viewpoints, and it's hard not to, but I continually try to back out and see the bigger picture and find those ways to bring in other groups, understand other perspectives. This is too important to get stuck in, we've got to do it this way or no other way. And it's hard to push back against that, but it's vital that we do that.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, I do believe we need to find common grounds among those who don't always share our vision or our perspective, and see how we can work together with those individuals as well. We think about the Congress and everything that's going there and, crossing the aisles and all of that, but the bottom line is that we definitely do need to talk more to each other and understand different perspectives on, certain issues.
So what I'm hearing from you is that relationships are important and building relationships of trust, right? And then at the same time, wanted to get your thoughts on how to amplify the voice that Congress needs to hear, that people do want effective climate legislation. It's not just, a minority of groups going in. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's groups, this is going to sound like an applause line, but I think it's groups like CCL, but I think it's also reaching out beyond CCL. It's important, a lot of my work is involved with going to Capitol Hill and talking to members of Congress, more often their staffs than the members of Congress, talking to staffs. I think we really need to have more grassroots. I think we need to work at local levels to sort of have things percolate up a little bit more, because I think that otherwise what happens is that the issue, as big as climate is, it gets siloed. And people say, well, we'll deal with that over here. But I think we need to hear more voices, as we've been saying. The sort of theme of this panel is kind of like we need to reach from if you want to put it on a political spectrum, from the left to the right. We need to just keep broadening that. And I think that that's going to be the approach that creates the biggest change. It's come a lot from students and young people over the past few years, since say 2018 or 2019. But I think it has to go beyond. It has to go beyond just youth. And frankly, young people shouldn't have the burden of saving the planet put on their shoulders. As Billy Joel said, they didn't start the fire.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't have to put the fire out. And people say, oh, we need to save the planet for future generations. This is happening now.
Yeah.
This is like our generation. No one's getting out of here from planet Earth. Well, no one's getting out alive, but also no one's getting out without really being impacted by this issue and challenge. So let's take the burden off of young people, and let's all carry the burden, like we are here. But let's broaden out this movement. I think it's doable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add that all politics are local, right? These guys in the Congress, they have to get reelected. So you need to take it to the district. You need to take it to your state. You need to have meetings in your state with your congressional representatives, with your senators. And yes, you need to bring the students to the table as well, because I'm going to tell you, they will listen. They will listen to those children, but you have to empower them to say the right things. That's why we do a lot of training in our coalition, but away from the students. We don't want to put the burden on the students, which is so true. But we have so many groups in various states doing so many things that are just not heard. And I just believe, yes, you have to come to Congress and you have to make sure that, that they're doing the right thing, but start local, start in your state, start where they have to get your vote and make it very clear this is your position. Now, here in Maryland, we're not in Maryland right now, we're in DC, but in Maryland, you know, we're fortunate in that we have, most of our representatives get it, okay? They get it, but other states do not have that situation. A lot of others don't. So you have to reach out to your friends who live in those other states and kind of empower them to talk to their legislators and make sure they're aware of, you know, we need to look at saving our planet.
So as an independent, I'm going to push back a little bit on that, which I think Alex will get as well. So I think for many of my Democratic friends, and I'm not trying to be partisan, but I often hear a lot of what you said, that our Democratic legislators get it. But to me, they're not taking effective climate action. You know, they get it in that they articulate that it's an emergency, and yet nobody seems to be acting like it's an emergency, right? So I don't know. Do you want to add to that, Alex?
Does anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I think you're right. There is an emergency that our legislators don't get, even at the state level. They keep kicking this can down the road, and I don't know where they think it's going to end, right? You know, we've got to turn this ship around, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. And so we have to keep stressing that. We have to keep stressing that.
I just keep thinking, part of me empathizes with people in office, because this is really hard, and we're talking about fundamentally changing the underpinnings of, it's like trying to take out someone's spinal column or something. This is, or nervous system. It's remaking the entire economy, which I would think we should look at as one of the greatest opportunities and challenges. It's like cathedral, and we're not going to get it done, you know, all in one swoop, but like the cathedrals that were built in the 14th and 13th century in Europe, those people, they didn't think that they were going to get the cathedral done in 10 years or 15 years. They're still building some cathedrals. This is our cathedral building for the 21st century. And so part of me thinks, well, yeah, it's hard, and I think legislators look and they say, sometimes they probably say, not today, because I don't know where to start with it. But we just have to keep pushing. We have to keep convincing them that this is a solvable, very solvable challenge, but it just takes courage and commitment. And that's why this group exists and my organization exists, and we just keep nudging them forward.
Thank you so much for all that.
We can't let Alex off the hook.
Cathedral building. You want to go in that
work,
cathedral building?
Like how to come together, kind of. There is a tendency to make the perfect the enemy of the good, and this is going to be there's a couple fantasies floating around that would be helpful if we could somehow collectively disabuse. One of them is that, there might be such a thing as like democratic hegemony in the United States of America, where there's 15 Congresses and 4 presidents at minimum between now and 2050. Maybe they'll all be controlled by Democrats. And then maybe they'll pack the cord and there'll be a Democratic cord. That's just, climate change is way too important to indulge in thinking like that. I mean, obviously, for us to get anything important done, it's going to have to be robustly bipartisan and therefore durable. Which means when there's opportunity to work together, even if it's not everything you want in the world, that's what we have to do. And when you look back at the history of landmark environmental law, it's always bipartisan. It's always signed by Republican presidents. And it's, no one's ever happy. Like the grassroots aren't happy. It's seldom on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post the next day. There's a grudging compromise that over time proves to be extremely valuable to our well-being as Americans. And that kind of compromise takes guts and sacrifice and the ability to work with people that you disagree with on a lot of other things, maybe even passionately. And I just think that there's a lot right now. There is so much that has that 70, 80% national agreement that has robust bipartisan coalitions in Congress, and we can move those things. Mm-hmm. And by the way, working together to move things like that actually helps us move bigger things in the future. I mean, you don't want to bring... When I first got to know CCL a little bit, it sounded to me, and by the way, I hope you guys can take a joke. I know you can, but it sounded a little bit like you were lugging a marriage proposal to a bunch of first dates.
That's awesome.
And I think it's okay for your outreach for people to know that this is your ultimate intention, but. It's okay to work together on small. What's the climate bill equivalent of going to a diner? And we need. And I don't want to. Of course, this isn't an issue that we should minimize with silly metaphors. But I mean, maybe it's probably okay. There's opportunity right now, so let's not throw it away because it's not big enough. The Energy Act at the end of 2020, who would have thought that the biggest climate bill we've ever had was passed in the Trump administration? But there's 2,500 million metric tons of CO2 that bill might erase from our economy. I mean, just the HFC portion of that bill is taking Texas emissions out for 5 or 6 years. I mean, those are huge gains. And I bet it's going to be easier for those senators, the 70 senators that sponsor legislation in that omnibus, to work together on other climate bills. So I just, that would be my
Well, that's a great point.
I just want to second that. And Alex makes a great point. Not everything has to be accomplished with a multi-trillion-dollar giant initiative. And I've been in DC for 20 plus years doing a lot of different jobs. Those bills are great. They almost never look like that at the end of the day. There's something, I have a friend and colleague, a friend out in California who's written about quiet climate policy. Mm-hmm. A lot can get done that isn't big ticket, it isn't, headline grabbing, as Alex says, but you work at it and you work at it, and sometimes it's quiet and behind the scenes. Oftentimes it's quiet and behind the scenes. That's how change happens in this country, really, and it is bipartisan. It has to be. Any lasting climate solution has to be bipartisan, and people don't necessarily like to hear that these days for a variety of reasons that we all know, but that's just a reality. We've been up this hill and back down this hill before with federal regulations and so forth, and the Clean Power Plan and this and that. It has to be bipartisan. Otherwise, it's just not going to stick.
And I really appreciate that all three of you have been talking about bipartisan legislation, climate legislation. So I'm just going to make a comment to all you CCLers. Have only time to ask one more questions, after which we will, Flannery or somebody back there will get your questions, okay? So I wanted to step back. I think it was Clarence who pointed out that sometimes you've got to step back to, look at progress that we've actually have made, right? So as I said, I've been with CCL for 9 years now, and I sometimes forget to step back and see that 9 years ago, very few people were talking about carbon pricing. I think CCL is the only one talking about bipartisan climate legislation, right? Now we have a lot of friends who are doing that as well. So I think that's really important to acknowledge on those days where it's difficult to do things. And I'm also hearing from you all, not just appreciation of all these other quiet climate legislations that are, or helpful to climate that are going through, but this approach of and, right? We had spent a lot of time focusing on federal climate legislation, which of course is going to be the most effective for system change, but given what Clarence said about how it's like an operation on your spinal, it sounds so painful that I think it does sound like we need to step into more of the state legislation that Wandra has been advocating for. So I wanted to get your thoughts. I don't know if you know that CCL has decided we're going to broaden our focus, not just on carbon fee and dividend, but other climate legislation, and try to work as much with other groups as possible. So any suggestions or thoughts on how to more effectively work together on climate legislation?
You mean CCL working effectively on
No,
other
with
issues?
other, like what can we do to work more effectively with other groups?
Oh, well, I think that I have two ideas in mind. I think there's legislation that's going on right now. There's still, mentioning reconciliation, there's still an effort to pull that across the finishing line. And, there's a really important aspect of that. I mentioned earlier, the clean energy and clean transportation tax incentives could really help accelerate the build out and deployment of renewable energy, tax incentives for advanced manufacturing and battery technology, those sort of things. That would be really helpful. Number one. Number two, I think Senator Whitehouse's staff, his office introduced a bill on border carbon adjustment. It's in my case, and I haven't read it, so don't ask me any details. But I think that, based on what I've read before about border carbon adjustments, that's an effective policy that could work. It has support, I think, across the aisle. So I think that just in general, and finally, I'll also say, environmental justice is an issue that I've learned that there's a lot of disagreement sometimes between carbon pricing advocates and the environmental justice community. One of the things I've tried to do in the past 2 years is sort of do more listening to the concerns of the EJ community with carbon pricing, and do what I can and what FCNL can to help bring those communities together. So I think that CCL could play a role in that as well, in terms of just listening to the concerns of communities. But I think that there's a wide open playing field of climate policies that CCL can do amazing work in.
Thank you for that.
And I have to agree with that, that we have to broaden our table, right? We work together as environmental groups, organizations, but we have to bring in other organizations you wouldn't even think about, because needless to say, they have a voice, they should have a voice as well. And when you talk about the environmental justice community, it is so important to listen to what they're saying, especially when you are creating, when you're drafting your legislation, to make sure it's going to cover some of those areas of concern. I say often that we throw billions of dollars into the city to solve certain issues, crime, housing, or whatever, and 10 years later, we're doing the same thing. Because academically, we feel that we know what should happen. Mm-hmm. But we need to talk to those who are walking that walk every day. And so I do believe that we need to just broaden our table when we're looking at addressing these issues. And there's a political aspect to that too that is important, right? Not all legislators support or have as a priority environmental justice, but they might have health. And the nexus between the two
Yes,
is important.
that's a great
All right?
point.
It might be education, but you have to look at how they relate to each other.
Yeah.
So I think if we took that approach, we would move a little further.
Thank you. I am told that we're on time right now, but I would love to get a minute from you if it's possible.
Let's do it's question time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll yield my minute to the floor.
We get questions shouted by somebody from above, I think.
Oh, Ricky does the voice of God for the questions?
Yeah, we have a question here. It seems that the Republican primary voters have an outsized influence on Republican members of Congress. Can you suggest ways to engage that demographic in climate action?
So I think, are we taking a bunch and then answering, or are we doing one at a time?
One at a time.
Primary voters have an outsized influence on members of Congress. I wouldn't say that's just a one party or the other. So yeah, look, I think that in safe seats that are deep blue or crimson red, your coalition and constituency building is just so important. Like you have to be able to. It's not the only thing that matters. I mean, Zori Zimmerman and I were reminiscing about that great story of when Mark Meadows said, I got people on my when he was a member of Congress in South Carolina or North Carolina. I got people on my team looking at carbon pricing because these CCLers are coming into our office for the last several years, and I don't think any of them are going to vote for me, but they make some good points. And so, I mean, you could be effective without only bringing in folks that they perceive to be in their political interest. I think most members of Congress genuinely want to represent, like, their district. Like, most of these folks are. I mean, this is not a glorious job. I think most of them have a commitment to public service and have a genuine wish to represent and be popular with their constituents. So you don't, it's not only a base voter or an activist or a door knocker that's going to be able to communicate effectively, but it is important that you have a cross section or you diversify your local group so that you can and bring new people every time. I mean, that's the other thing too. You're building relationships, but you're also showing that you have that you represent like a large and diverse portion of the constituency. So sorry, that is not a great answer. Maybe Wandra and Clarence can improve it.
I can't improve it.
You did good.
Yeah, you did good.
And we have another question here. What are some ways we can encourage climate advocacy in communities and organizations that are lacking time, energy, support, or capacity?
That is a tough one. It's when you're lacking time, energy, support, and capacity, if there are ways that, well, Alex mentioned earlier, 80% of philanthropy towards climate goes to progressive groups?
Oh, 80% would be a dream. I think it's more like 98, 99%.
98. Well, one way to maybe do that is to identify ways to supply that time, energy, support, and capacity to organizations and to people. We talk about the EJ community. A lot of local environmental justice groups around the country are poorly funded, have little attention, and they're not getting the finance from the tech bros in Silicon Valley that are jumping into the space. So, maybe that's an area. And it's not just the EJ community. There are working people across this country, and it might be slightly controversial, but a lot of people that work in the oil and gas industry who go to jobs every day and have built middle-class lives. You know, I know that industry is what we're trying to push back against, but we have to take into account the needs of working class people in this country who are far away from Washington, D.C., and are, you know, in rural communities, in tribal communities. Tying this issue into people's everyday concerns there, and not really imposing it from the top, but listening to where people are coming from, whether they're in an EJ community, or whether they're in a fossil fuel dependent community. And if we can tie this issue into where people, basically, if we can meet people where they're at, you know, you have to meet people where they're at with this issue and do some education. I think that that's one way that we might be able to, you know, broaden that connectivity and help people to help really make this an issue that is alive for a lot of people.
I mean, this is a difficult, that's really a difficult question, but I would say partnership. You know, partner with other organizations that are doing similar. Even with the coalition that I built, yes, our concentration is getting legislation passed, carbon pricing legislation passed. However, you know, we have a lot of different organizations and groups at our table, and if they have a concern or an issue or a policy they want enacted, we support them as well. We'll give them extra, you know, resources to help them. And so I think, you know, you just have to broaden our tables and partnership, especially with those smaller organizations that are having a difficult time.
And this is our last question. We only have 2 minutes. Can you name industries that profit from polarization of the American public?
What's the question?
Could you repeat that?
I didn't get the question.
Which industries?
Can you name industries which profit from the polarization of the public?
Name industries.
Oh,
The media.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't want to be negative.
come on, Clarence.
Cable television. It's like, come on. It's just, people know better. And it does. And Alex mentioned it earlier. It's like conflict and division sells. And
Right.
it's social media. It's the head of CNN basically said that they profited off of the Trump years or so forth. It's about ratings. And so, yeah, not to pick on them, but like the media.
Let's pick on them.
Yeah, let's pick on them. Come on, let's stop that.
So it sounds like part of it is we need to stop watching cable so that they stop profiting from it.
Well, we need to make our voices heard, that this is not something that, it's like eating too much junk food or something like that, you know? It might be fun in the moment, maybe, I don't know why it would be, but it's not getting the world is too serious a place, and it's too dangerous a place for us to invest heavily in profiting off of division. It's just, the world we live in is a serious world, and this country can't afford the luxury of being divided by people who want to, for ratings? Just, come on.
You know,
With the ratings come profits, and that is the bottom line. That is the bottom line. And so I agree with you. We need to show them that you need to go in a different direction.
No one's going to profit, and I totally agree with you. And no one's going to profit if we're sitting in a country that's kind of a smoking ruin or a hollow shell of what it used to be. That's not profiting.
Exactly.
You know, that's not. You can sit with your bags of money in a degraded society, then that's not profit.
Wandra, please bring some optimism back.
Well, the good thing is this, and I think Sabrina alluded to it, more and more people and government are acknowledging the fact that we do have a crisis. we have to make a change. Folks are looking for ways to do it. We just haven't quite decided or agreed upon how to do it, but we're talking now about it more than ever. And I think that is positive. And it's time for us to take advantage of this point in time. And, I think that is a positive, right?
Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
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 Hey, can I add one thing? It might also help to remember that, what we're going through now is not new. There's nothing new under the sun. We have been a divided and polarized country for most of our. There was like this 20-year blip where we all watched the same Walter Cronkite, But other than that, like it's 250 years of partisan media. That I think that a big difference is that the Chicago Tribune was a Republican paper, but you didn't read it like 18 hours a day. You did other things that Tocqueville wrote about that kept us connected to people and our communities and invested in the shared future. And I mean, it's I think in what was it, in the 40s, whenever I Love Lucy was on, it was like 70% of all US TVs tuned in to I Love Lucy. It's like we're all consuming the same thing. Now the highest rating thing is less than 1% of the population. Mm-hmm. I mean, the biggest show, it's 3 million people. I think the Game of Thrones season finale or series finale got like 2% of the population. I mean, so you go from like 60% to like 2%. So it's so segmented that it can serve people exactly what their tribe wants, and that's going to be tough to cut through. I mean, I think that's the challenge. So Wandra brought us back positive, and look at what I'm doing.
No, but you make a really good point. It's yeah.
Yeah. So really, the challenge is to get like a few % of the American public to listen to the three of you talking to each other.
I vote for that.
I think the challenge is well, not the challenge, but no one needs 18 hours of breaking news.
No.
I mean, that's the thing. There's no such thing. They make it up. It's not breaking news. So it's helping people do other things with their time, and it really just comes back down to civil society. I want to plug Ben Sass's book, Them, so that I'll stop babbling and you could read that, and it makes the point better than I would.
All right, we want to thank our panel today, and thank you to Sabrina Fu. Let's give a big round of applause.
Look at this clapping tally.
Cool. Great job.
Please welcome to the stage Mark Reynolds.